for my totally unbiased review of Godzilla vs. Kong.
Bows to who?
Nobody gon' stop for me.
Kong bows to no one.
Oh boy, did this movie have a long journey to get here. I was hyped for it after the initial reveal back when King of the Monsters came out during the end credits, and sadly, it kept getting pushed back thanks to Perfect Cell.
I finished!
Despite that, the marketing team knew exactly how to hype us up, showing us enough highlights of the fights between Kong and Godzilla set to a killer track by Chris Classic. It was glorious to behold, one of the best trailers of the last decade, at least. And true, the human characters didn't sound great in it, but considering the history of Godzilla and Kong movies, the human characters tend to be the weakest part. As for me, I adored both Kong Skull Island and Godzilla King of the Monsters, which I rewatched leading up to this movie. So to finally have them rematch with Legendary Pictures and Warner Brothers backing them, it was a dream come true for a kaiju fan like me. And I'll say this, when it comes to the titular fights, it delivers. I think what's nice to see is that the monster effects keep getting shown more and more in daylight, or at least in brightness. The problem with the past two Godzilla movies, the first one especially, was that the monster effects would be hidden behind things like darkness or overhead clouds or ways to obfuscate the monster effects and do things cheaper. King of the Monsters showed more of the monsters, but they were during the night and they were raining, and so it was so there was still more stuff to kind of cheat your way through it. But especially in Kong Skull Island and here, so much of the effects work for the monsters is done in bright daylight, so we get to see everything in vivid detail. Not to mention the fact that the fights here are some of the best in the franchise so far, and mainly because they have weight to them. I think the thing with the previous fights in the other MonsterVerse movies is that the fights don't really feel like they have much of an impact. It's just fight and then moving them right along, which is fine, but here, when Godzilla and Kong fight, they're always like huffing and puffing afterwards, like they just got through a hefty workout, and they're trying to recover from it. It's almost like little snippets of the fight from They Live, where it just keeps on going, and as soon as you think it's over, it just keeps on going. It's not as intense as that, but it has that kind of a weight to it where you feel exhausted for them after they fight. Of course, by the way, go check out They Live, one of the best fight scenes in cinematic history, bar none. If you've seen the previous movies, what they do here is they continue the expansion of the Hollow Earth that was introduced in the last movie, King of the Monsters, as well as what's going on with Monarch, though to a lesser degree. Namely, what's been going on is that it seems the other Titans have been removed, killed. There's hints in the opening credits that Godzilla and Kong are the last Titans standing, but we don't really see much confirmation of that in the movie itself. There are other Titans shown in the movie, namely things in the Hollow Earth, and then there's some Skull Crushers from Kong Skull Island showing up again at one point, but there really aren't any of the Titans that were introduced in the last movie brought up again. No Mothra, no Rodan. They get like little hints in the opening credits and then like no other mention the rest of the movie. So I'm not sure what Warner Legendary planned to do with them, but it's hard to say where all the Titans are at the moment, since so much of this movie was focused on Godzilla and Kong. And they don't make really much reference outside of something, again, from the opening credits of Godzilla's new radioactive pulse ability that he got. So that never comes up in the movie, because that's an instant win for him, of course. But they don't even make a reference like, oh, he could build up to it again. So there's a weird, lapse in continuity between the three movies for some reason, and you'd think they'd be tighter on that, but at the same point, like the Showa era series and even some of the Millennium series has wonky continuity too. So I mean, whatever. It all depends. There's not. This isn't the MCU. This is the MonsterVerse. They're not taking it that seriously. But where they did drop the ball is that there is somebody working for the villains that they reveal to be Serizawa, but they don't establish that he's related to Dr. Serizawa, Ken Watanabe's character. So if they intend, maybe it's in deleted scenes, but if they intended to have some relative, a son, a nephew, a brother, something like that from Dr. Serizawa working against Godzilla, that would be some major pathos. That would be a good story arc. But it never gets addressed. It's one dropped name and then nothing else. I wonder if there's going to be like a longer cut with some, or like revelation that in some of the deleted scenes they had more for Serizawa's character in this, and that he was fueled by Dr. Serizawa's obsession with Godzilla to pursue Godzilla's destruction in some way, but it just never made it to the final cut for some reason. So it's just a missed opportunity, sadly. Speaking of those villains, Apex Cybernetics, they're kind of a downgrade, if you ask me. In the last two movies, we were dealing with eco-fascists, so we at least could have the discussion about how their scorched earth policy of human extinction isn't going to be the answer to our problems with population and resource management. And in Kong Skull Island, they were Vietnam soldiers, and it was about basic, a lot of the same themes you get from traditional Vietnam War movies. But here, it's just an evil tech company. And, it feels like that they didn't do anything more with it. Hell, even the villain has way less screen presence than the last two movies. And it's not like Damian Bashir is a bad actor or even bad at playing villains, but they just give him nothing to do. He shows up in one scene, but we can already tell he's the bad guy. And then the whole rest of the scene where afterwards he's just like, playing the victim of Godzilla's attack from the beginning of the movie, the rest of the time we see him, he's basically twirling his mustache and monologuing about how humanity will be the apex, hence the name Apex Cybernetics. And it's just like, wow, you really didn't give a damn about making a decent villain this time. At least Charles Dance and Samuel L. Jackson were given stuff to do. Charles Dance committed acts of terrorism, and Sam Jackson had to try and lead his soldiers through this hellscape, and Jackson even got his own character arc in Skull Island. It's just this time around, they didn't even bother fleshing out the villains in any reasonable way. It's just shorthand and, stereotypes and just moving right along. So it's kind of a missed opportunity, actually. I mean, that's the thing, is that, yeah, people come for the monster fights, but they can't take up the whole thing. There has to be some kind of a plot and at least give us something. But for the villains here, they didn't really give us much of anything. Meanwhile, on the hero side, we did get some nice new characters in the form of Rebecca Hall and the newcomer Kaylee Hoddle. Rebecca Hall plays Eileen Andrews, and Hoddle plays her adopted daughter, Gia. Gia is this orphan deaf girl who lives on Skull Island with Andrews and forms this relationship with Kong, as Gia just goes out there and hangs out with Kong while Monarch is basically holding him in the dome from the second Hunger Games movie. And Hoddle is deaf herself. She's from two deaf parents who themselves are from deaf families. So there's this lineage of living with deafness. And so basically the whole time she's on screen, the only time she communicates with Andrews is when they're when they're using ASL. And what's interesting is that Alexander Skarsgård actually learned ASL to communicate with Hoddle behind the scenes, which is nice to hear. And it gives me the idea of the actress from A Quiet Place, where they got a deaf actress and they made it about her being deaf, and they played into that a bit. And it's not as well executed as it is in A Quiet Place, but it's a nice touch, and I'm glad they included it. It made Gia a lot more interesting of a character than what we would usually get. And I think Otto does a great job too. So I'm very curious to see her get what she gets after this, because this is her debut in terms of acting. So hopefully she gets more work after this. As for Skarsgård, he isn't bad, but his character is basically nothing. Like, his whole thing is that he's a scientist who wrote about the Hollow Earth before it was revealed to be true, and so he was a laughingstock who can't even sell his own books, and then Apex comes in and basically funds his chance to prove that he was right all along, and then he forms the relationship with Andrews and basically teams up with her to help with Kong, and he's kind of generic in terms of a character. He's fairly forgettable. They stopped developing him after the first act. Once Kong comes into the picture, he doesn't have anything else to do, really, and it's kind of disappointing. Like, Skarsgård is not bad, but he's just given, like a lot of people in this movie, he's not given a whole lot to do. Meanwhile, you've got Brian Tyree Henry's character, who just rubs me the wrong way. He's this conspiracy theorist podcaster that Millie Bobby Brown's character Madison follows, and is just basically there to get her into Apex Cybernetics. Madison's whole subplot is just there to try and get into Apex Cybernetics and reveal the secrets of what's really going on. But to have her get in by way of a podcaster feels really lazy. Like, the whole point is that he's this conspiracy nut who's embedded himself within Apex Cybernetics and is revealing all of this stuff to, I'm guessing, nobody. Otherwise, Apex would have easily caught on. Although if they're Apex, even if nobody was listening, I'm sure they would have caught up to him. Which is why I kind of feel like if they went with the Edward Snowden route, where he's secretly leaking documents and information onto the dark web through like VPNs and stuff, and he's trying to remain untraceable, and that's how, and he basically becomes this other entity like Anonymous, or he goes by this moniker or something like that, that Madison becomes obsessed with. And she thinks Apex is up to something because this guy's revealing all of these documents and information from the company. And meanwhile, her dad, Kyle Chandler's character, who's basically in glorified cameo here, is more interested in the whole backlash of Godzilla starting to attack the coast and is doing damage that's unnatural to him. But they kind of, like I said, there's not a lot of really direct continuity. It feels like Kyle Chandler's character completely regressed between movies. I feel like he would, but the whole point should have been his struggle was with trying to manage Monarch and the backlash he's facing from Godzilla attacking. And that never really comes across. It feels like he has no idea why Godzilla's doing this, and he should believe Madison that Godzilla is attacking, but he can't do anything because his hands are tied because he has to run Monarch. And Madison, being impatient, decides to handle things herself. But they don't go that route. It's just Dad doesn't believe Madison that Godzilla has a reason that he's attacking, despite the fact that he's been shown that he has reasons for why he does the things he does. He follows a pattern as an animal, and he should know this because he's an animal. Yeah, like I said, continuity's all messed up between these movies. But yeah, Millie Bobby Brown's character, Madison, is just, her whole thing is just two superfluous characters to get her into cybernetics. And while the podcaster is annoying and not all that fun, Brian Tyree Henry is a good actor, and he's a good comedic actor specifically. I just don't like his character. I don't like what they give him to do. He drops the whole, like, fluoride in the water is put there by the Nazis to keep us docile. And then he drops the Illuminati at one point. He brings up Roswell at another point. And while, yes, the science is very fast and loose in this universe, the fact that we have to take him seriously, I hate that trope. I hate the trope that, oh, it turns out the conspiracy theorists were right all along. So what else is really going on? And it's just like, God damn it. If he was just an Edward Snowden type, I would have liked him a lot more. Even if he was this more like conspiratorial, like he's scared that Apex is following him. Just taking away the stupid conspiracy nut side of things would have made him a lot more likable, for me at least. But at least he's not the kid from Hunt for the Wilder People and Deadpool 2. That poor kid plays basically the guy who provides the car for Madison. Like, he's basically there to be a bad comic relief sidekick to Madison and provide the transportation for her to get to Brian Tyree Henry's character. And they try to even incorporate like him hacking into Apex at the end in the climax, but even that's played for comic relief, and it's not all that funny. And he's just not. This is probably his worst character. Not that he's bad, because he was good in Deadpool 2. I haven't seen Hunt for the Wilder People, but I've heard he's great in it. He's not a bad comedic actor. It's just, once again, they don't give him anything to do here except bad comic relief sidekick stuff. So he's completely useless, and Kyle Chandler's in a glorified cameo. So the fact that Kyle Chandler has more weight to him than this kid really says something about how badly written he is. Spoiler alert from this point on, I will say that the people who combed through the initial trailer did call it right. The big bad was, in fact, Mechagodzilla. And the design is interesting here, too. It kind of goes for like a Truckosaurus from The Simpsons meets Michael Bay's Megatron. It's a very interesting idea behind him, and the final fight with him is just amazing. The whole last half hour is probably some of the best in the entire MonsterVerse. And yeah, the way Apex gets its comeuppance from Mechagodzilla is pretty weak. Although the idea behind it is kind of interesting. We do learn that the final Ghidorah head, the one that was picked up by Charles Dance in the end of the last movie in the post-credits, found its way to Apex and is essentially being used to pilot the Mechagodzilla. Mechagodzilla is basically a drone piloted through a psychic connection, piloted by Serizawa. But once again, we don't learn anything about him or how he came to this technology or anything about that. That may be all filmed on the cutting room floor, but the whole idea is that, interestingly enough, Ghidorah is basically the brains behind Mechagodzilla, which is kind of interesting. It ties into the Heisei era Mechagodzilla, where there it was Mecha King Ghidorah, this is really deep cut stuff. Basically, Godzilla in the Heisei era fights a King Ghidorah. They take it to the future, make it a cyborg, and it comes back in time and defeats Godzilla. Then people in our time use the future metal to make Mechagodzilla in that era. So it's kind of an interesting tie-in to that in a way, where King Ghidorah leads into the creation of Mechagodzilla. But yeah, the way that Apex gets its comeuppance from Mechagodzilla is pretty weak, and it's just a quick shortcut to get to the main event. So that's kind of been the big problem here, is that the human stories are so superfluous and just uninteresting that it's almost like they know that we want to get to the main event and get to the kaiju fighting, but instead of at least giving us something to make our way through it, it's all just fluff. It's all just uninteresting fluff. Whereas at least in Kong Skull Island and even in King of the Monsters, there was some weight behind it. There was something of interest there to keep you hooked in, or at least try. Here, they don't even try. And that's more on the writer's side of things. So I guess they just didn't bother. And it's hard to disagree with them, because once again, the main event is Godzilla and Kong fighting. So the sooner we can get to that, the better. But it's just, the problem is that the human stuff kind of detracts. It's kind of why I'm not as into this as I was King of the Monsters or Skull Island. So while I didn't love it as much as the last two movies, I will say Adam Wingard did a great job directing it, which is good to see, because that means that Thundercats movie he's attached to at least has a good director behind it. When it's the kaiju fighting, when it's the titular Kong and Godzilla fighting each other, and even coming down to Mechagodzilla entering the fray, it's amazing. Some of the best effects, some of the best fight choreography, just a blast. And I kind of wish I almost could go to the theaters and see it on the big screen, because man, that would be worth it. But yeah, it's just that the human parts never quite work for me. Everything else besides the kaiju is at least on par or a downgrade from the previous movies. And not enough to ruin it, but just enough to not make it one of my favorites. So yeah, King of the Monsters was my favorite the year it came out. Managed to make it through the entire year of 2019 as my favorite movie that year. This is probably going to make it in the top 10. But as more movies come out, I'm curious how much it's going to stick around at the top half of it. But yeah, it's still a blast. I would highly recommend you check it out. And if you're able to see it in theaters, definitely see it in theaters because this is a blast to see in theaters. I'm imagining. But now I'm wondering what's left for the MonsterVerse. Are they going to bring in more Toho stuff? Bring in some of the deep cuts like Varen and Manda? Bring in like the Atlanteans or some of the aliens even? Are they going to focus on entirely new monsters like they've been introducing? Maybe there's going to be an HBO Max series, kind of like how even the Sony Godzilla got its own TV series that was actually better than it. I don't know. I haven't heard a lot of what their future plans are, so I'll have to wait and see. Until next time, I'm John Bailey, and remember, it's not about whether who wins or loses. It's about the fact that we got to see a giant gorilla and a radioactive lizard beat the crap out of each other and a giant robot. See you later, folks.